Welcome to Rogue Bogues, my journey series. This is episode 5. This will be predominantly about the 2004 Athens Olympic Games. So let's get rogue. First off, we start with getting an invite to the Boomers camp, the Australian national team camp. Hadn't been part of the program ever, so I was kind of going into it blind, not knowing really what to expect. One thing I did know was there'll be a lot of players in that camp itself of 20, 25 odd players that I looked up to as a kid and that I watched and that were NBL superstars. A few of them played in Europe. A few of them had small stints in the NBA, and names like Shane Heal, Tony Ronaldson, Jason Smith, CJ Bruden, Brett Wheeler, Brett Maher, so on and so forth. And guys that I supported from 8, 9, 10 years old. So that was kind of surreal, even though I was coming from the University of Utah and interacting with NBA players at times. It was still a really cool achievement to be on the same court as some of these fellas. So I remember how hard the camps were. Brian Goorjian was the head coach. So for those of you that remember, early 2000s was kind of a dark period for the Australian Boomers national basketball team. We generally had owned, or have always owned, New Zealand, always been kind of the better team on this side of the world within Oceania. And it was the first time that they'd put it on us, really. And it was in the qualifications for the 2002 World Championships, which ended up being in Indiana in the US. They beat us in those qualifiers, I believe, in 2001, which knocked us out as a national team of going to that World Championships. I think it was one of the only ones we've missed in a number of years. I'd have to go back and research how far back, but I still remember what the AIS at the time I was, and it was kind of a dark day for the basketball program of Australia, and a lot of disappointed people. Our national team coaches, the junior coaches were disappointed. Everyone was kind of disappointed and didn't get to go to that World Championships as a country. So Brian Goorjian then came in to somewhat steady the ship, one of the toughest and most winningest NBL coaches of all time. So it was a natural fit, and he was great. I just do remember, though, those camps were no joke. It was 2-a-days. 2 to 3 hours in the morning, 2 to 3 hours at night, and they were full on. There was, these days, it's a little bit different where you can now, generally one of your sessions is a contact session where you do a lot of live stuff and physical and knocks on the body. And then generally the other session on that day will be more shooting, more mental, more running through sets, still at speed and still intense, but a bit more of a rest as far as the wrestling and hitting and screening and all that. And that's where it's changed today. Back then, none of that. It was both sessions were as intense as the other. Both were physical. Guys were banged up. I mean, I remember those camps. A lot of guys would just get hurt because it was just so physical and intense, and everyone was trying to make that national team squad. So I definitely remember that. It was an experience that, as I said, I was kind of flying blind into it. I didn't know that I'd make the team. I was coming from a pretty good year at the University of Utah and into a program where I'd be kind of the young star, but it's still the unknown. I didn't know if I'd make the squad. I didn't know if I'd be in the rotation. I didn't know if I'd play minutes, and that was part of the battle. I felt like I had a good camp. I still wasn't at a stage with my body where I could wrestle day in, day out with the likes of a Tony Ronaldson or a Paul Rogers or a Brett Wheeler, because they were just physical grown men, and I was still kind of growing into my body. I was 20 years old at the time, and that was the challenging part. To do that day in, day out is hard at a young age, and I was still kind of getting in the weight room as much as I could at the University of Utah to get that body better, and I could hold my own for a day or two, and then you'd have that day where you just physically were dominated by some of these bigger guys, and that was just a good learning curve, and that definitely got me on the right path to respecting the weight room and making sure that I get, as strong as I can in those off seasons and whenever I'm in the weight room. So just a small tidbit there. But like I said, I thought I had a chance to make the team. I end up making the team, and I then end up starting at the Athens Olympics down the track. First off, we have some friendlies to go, and I thought, I'm starting in these friendlies. Is coach trying things out? I've got to make sure that even though I'm starting, that I haven't got that mindset of like, I'm starting for the national team, I've made it, because, in the friendlies, it could just be he's trying different lineups, and ended up earning that spot, I guess. It was a great experience. That team was pretty welcoming to a young fellow like myself, even though it took me time to fit in. I was obviously part of a huge generation gap with a lot of those fellas, all were towards their late 20s, early 30s, and I'm 19, 20 coming in. I remember I had a mullet. I was the wog boy with the mullet. I had blonde tips at the bottom of it. I kind of, like I am today, marched to the beat of my own drum and did my own thing. So they accepted me for the most part. It took me some time to fit in and open up with the group, but it was a great experience. So New Zealand was my first foray into international basketball, the New Zealand Tall Blacks national team. And for those of you that remember, that was probably the pinnacle of their program. They went to the 2002 World Championships, as I discussed. I think they finished fourth. They had their best run in basketball history for that nation, and they were tough. They were a team that ran a kind of a regimented type offense that was real methodical and mechanical, but they had a lot of reads out of it, and they just would run you to, run it to death and just grind you out. And they were physical, they were strong, they had bigs that could shoot. They had some guards with some fire in them, like Mark Dickel. They had a bunch of shooters, Kirk Penny, Phil Jones. And then they had obviously the big fella, Perra Cameron, inside that would just absolutely obliterate people on screens. I mean, he was equivalent of a rugby player playing basketball with a beautiful shooting touch. So he would just lay people out on screens. And if you helped for a second, he'd pick and pop and be wide open from three. So they had a really good system. They were tough to play against. So we go out to New Zealand in a 3-game series. Friendly series, just to get some experience with that group, a new Boomers group, and obviously they were going to the Olympics as well because they'd qualified. We had both qualified for the Oceania region based on them finishing fourth at the 2002 World, which was kind of a good thing for both of us. So it did us a little bit of favors. And we go to New Zealand to play them, and I remember it was a tough series. It was physical, intense. Everything you want it to be for an international series between Australia and New Zealand. For the Americans out there, I mean, think a rivalry similar to, America versus Canada, or even back in the day with, America versus Russia and something. That's the Australia-New Zealand rivalry. It's as intense as you can get from any aspect of international sport, whether it's cricket, basketball, or even just throwing marbles. If those two countries are playing, it's usually pretty intense. So go over there, and I remember the first game I have. I'm obviously starting. I'm pumped. This, that, and the national anthem comes. So we sing our national anthem. We lock arms, and then New Zealand get ready to do the haka, which is obviously a traditional dance that's done by most sporting teams in New Zealand. And I guess a few of our fellas said, look, we're going to walk up to the half-court line, show them the respect for what they're doing, but at the same time, let's not take a back step. Let's not show we're intimidated by any ways. And we did that, and I got a welcome to that game by, I believe it was Dylan Boucher. So, anyone that knows what the huck is about, they start to move closer and closer towards the other half of the court, the other half of the field as it goes on. And by the end of the haka, Boucher was probably the last 15 seconds of it was basically I could feel the spit on my face from him yelling the haka. And he finished nose to nose with me. And the crowd got on its feet, and I wasn't moving. Boucher wasn't moving. And we're nose to nose for a good 5, 6, 7 seconds. There's video and photos of it online, I believe. And so it took his team and the Boomers, my team, to come and pull us apart, and then go back to our benches to prepare for the jump ball. But I still remember that was probably calculated on their part. I believe they usually pick out a young fellow that they want to try to intimidate or mess with, but I still remember that to this day. It actually fired me up even more. I came out and had a few dunks early and was yelling and screaming back at him. So it was definitely an experience I remember. That was kind of the first time I'd learned how crazy the actual tours were. So we end up winning the series, I believe 3-0. I don't think we lost a game on that 3-game series. And our last game is at, I believe it was at a place called Dunedin in New Zealand. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I believe it was Mark Dickel's hometown. Really small country town, not much going on there. And one of the first kind of welcomes to the national team off the court escapades was, we're a pretty loose group, and a lot of banter, a lot of guys giving each other shit, doing crazy stuff, pranking each other, all that kind of normal stuff that happens on a sporting team. But I remember we go to after the game, there was one pub in town. It was a small country town. There was one pub, one bar. That was it. There was nothing else there. So everyone basically that was part of that game was there. The media people, the singer that sung the national anthem was there. Like, everyone was there because it's the only place you could really go. So I remember we were having some drinks, had a meal, and somehow the New Zealand Tall Blacks were there. We were there. Kind of the series had a bit of scuffles back and forth, but now that it was over, it was kind of friendly again. And that was a cool thing about the rivalry for the most part. Like, when you got most of those guys off the court, it was pretty friendly, and Australia and New Zealand, similar ideals, and it had a few drinks together and whatnot. And somehow guys were playing darts, and then it turned into guys throwing darts at each other. And I don't know how it started or why it started, but basically guys were going up, taking their shirts off near the dartboard, and it was kind of a game to see who could take the most darts into their chest and who could take a dart and let it hang off once it hit their pec or their stomach, that it was actually, and there were guys that were taking darts and it would hit you and just be hanging out. And it was just like, what are you guys doing? Like, this is crazy. And they were just going back and forth with it. And I still remember a few teammates of mine had 10, 15, 20 dart holes, little piercings all over their body. And I was like, wow, this is the national team. These guys are nuts. But they're the kind of things that used to happen when guys were having a few too many brews or wines or bourbon and cokes. But that was eye-opening to an extent. I remember, so after that, our first camp was at the AIS. Our second camp was at Gosford, New South Wales. Then we played the New Zealand series. Then our last camp before we went off to Europe for the tournament was at the Gold Coast. So we go up to the Gold Coast, have a 5 or 6 day camp, intense, whatever. And then at the end of that, they organize, one of those little kind of catamaran yacht type things just for our team. We had a barbecue on it and then had a bunch of drinks on there and cruised around kind of the rivers of the Gold Coast and Brisbane for a couple of hours. And then I remember we come back to, I believe it was the Gold Coast Casino at the time. We go there and go to the bar to have a few more drinks. And it was I think it was a Saturday night or a Friday night. So very, very busy. You couldn't order a drink for the life of you. It was one of those places where there was like 150 people at the bar trying to get a drink and guys slurring their words and the waitress just trying to do the best she can or the waiter trying to do the best he can. But I guess there was a point where we couldn't order a drink for the life of us. And one of my teammates, Martin Catalini, he was a great fella, really fun to be around. I'm sure he wouldn't have an issue with this story, but I guess he was getting really impatient about having a drink, and we're all at the bar, turn around for a second, turn back around, and Cat has jumped over the bar somehow and just pouring himself a jug of beer for us. And no one really noticed. Everyone was like, what's going on here? And then an Islander fella who was security, big guy we're not going to mess with, basically just grabs him by the collar and just drags him out of the casino. We get thrown out. We don't leave him out to dry. Obviously, we leave with him, but kind of shenanigans that go on some of these tours. And that was pretty tame for the most part, just being silly. But there are some teams that definitely go over the line. Not that I've been a part of, but there are, as we know, some things that happen sometimes on sporting tours that are not the proudest moments for a lot of athletes. We didn't get to those points very often, I don't believe, but just some silly things that happen with, I guess, a group of guys, alcohol, testosterone, after a long tour of training. It's just one of those things you got to deal with. So after the last game in the Gold Coast, we then have 4 or 5 days to kind of go home, pack, and get ready for the tour. We all meet at the airport, our respective airports. I think we all flew to Sydney first, wherever we were from. So Melbourne, Brisbane, wherever you were from, you met in Sydney, and then we had an international flight to Italy. First off, we had a pre-Olympic tournament in Italy, which was pretty cool, where they put us up in, I think, the southern part of Italy on the coast there, and put us in this resort that was kind of at the top of the cliff top, ocean view, Mediterranean. What could be better, right? It's part of playing basketball, and I've told many times that the places that I've managed to see and the things that I've managed to do based on basketball were, bucket list type things and life-changing at times. So definitely very, very lucky and blessed to be able to see things that I definitely wouldn't have had a chance to see if it wasn't for basketball. So people always relate to basketball and money and fame and all that kind of stuff and being a pro athlete. But sometimes it's the small things that you see. You see some small towns in Italy. You see how they make their pasta, how they make their food, and you get access to a little bit of that more than you probably should because you're with a sporting team, and you might go to a small town that's really proud of what they do and they want to really impress you. So you get those opportunities all around the world, and I definitely cherish those throughout my career. So we get to Italy, playing a pre-Olympic tournament. First thing, leading up to the tour, so the final team had been finally announced, the team that was going to Europe. They finally made their cuts right after that Gold Coast camp. I'll make the team, obviously doing pretty well, get told by the veteran leadership group, or basically everyone that had been part of a Boomers campaign, hey mate, we do this, we have a tradition where we kind of initiate our rookies into the program. You need to do some sort of performance or whatever you want to do for the group. So it could be a song, could be sing a song, it could be examples of what some guys have done is guys have done card tricks, guys have done magic tricks, guys have done songs, guys have told jokes, guys have done kind of acts. We've had all kinds of crazy shit. Some of it I probably can't get too in depth into because some of it was absolutely crazy. But it's a tradition we have with the Australian Boomers, and it's been carried on since as far as I've heard back, and it's been that flames continued to be alight through every campaign. Now, it's only for major tournaments, so it's only for a World Championships or an Olympics. It's not for a qualifiers. It's not for friendlies, but it's something that's really cool and bonds the group. So anyway, I get told about this. You got to do something, and I'm kind of good at basketball, and that's about it. So I'm like, I was in a panic about this thing, and I'm like, what do I do? I'm not a good singer, or I'm not confident singing. I can't really just go up there and talk shit, so I need to figure something out. And that had me more nervous than the Olympic Games at one point, to be honest with you. That had me stressing. So I end up partnering with David Anderson, the world famous David Anderson, good friend of mine, one of the winningest basketball players of all time from Australia. He's played all around the world and managed to bring home trophies from a bunch of different countries. He played in the NBA for a couple of years and then finished his career in the NBL last season with the Illawarra Hawks. I think he's still trying to go again, funnily enough. So we'll see how that all goes. But anyhow, we partnered up because it was Dave Anderson's first national team campaign. We decided to do a song. We did Jimmy Barnes, Working Class Man with a Twist. So we basically changed all the words on the song to take the piss out of different teammates and coaches on the team. So we did a pretty good job of it. It took us a while. It took us a meeting 3, 4, 5 times. We met for an hour each when we weren't at training or had some spare time, writing the lyrics and doing all that and putting it all together. And he had one verse, I had one verse, and then we did the chorus together, and then it was another verse, chorus, and it went down pretty well. I mean, the fellas enjoyed it, but it was, like I said, that had me more nervous than playing basketball at Olympic Games. And it is, to this day, one of the best traditions I've been a part of. I still remember just 2019, was a first for a lot of guys, and there were some very, very interesting performances in that era of rookies, and some are great, some are terrible. I'll give you an example of one. There was a very, very good NBL player from the 90s and 2000s. Didn't play in the NBA, so you can do your own research and come to your own conclusions of who you think this might be. Was a superstar in the NBL for a number of years. Played for a few NBL teams, a few in Queensland, a few in, maybe one in Sydney and Melbourne. So anyhow, rumor has it, one of the wives' tales that just carries on from the program was, now excuse my language, that he was getting railed about doing his rookie night, was nervous about it, and was getting killed by all the veterans. And apparently he got up in front of the group, and this was his performance. Hickory dickory dock, the vets can suck my cock. Excuse my language, but verbatim, that was what he did. So it just gives you a feel for how crazy and out there some of this stuff is. There was a rumor that one guy got up there and drank a whole bottle of Jim Beam or Jack Douglas or one of those bourbon 750ml bottles and just sculled it, and then basically passed out not long after. But that was his performance. So I think mine, Dave's and I were a bit more tame than that. So there were some awful ones too. Some guys told jokes that got no laughs and stuff like that. So that just goes with the flow. But anyhow, moving on to that, we play pretty well in that tournament. I remember, I think I was the MVP of that tournament, All-Star 5. I can't remember. It was only a 2 or 3 game tournament. I believe we lost to Italy in the final. This was one of the few times Italy was really good. They had a really solid squad. They were well put together. They ended up beating the US not long after playing us in a friendly lead up. And that was the infamous US team that had a lot of off-court dramas with Carmelo and Allen Iverson and Stephon Marbury and the head coach Larry Brown, where there was reported to be a lot of turmoil there between the coach and the players. But they ended up beating the US going into the Olympics, which gave them a great confidence boost. So we end up finishing that tournament, go off to the Olympics, and that's a whole nother deal. So you get to the Olympic Village, you're getting all your gear, you're getting this. It's kind of exciting. There's a buzz in the air. And once you're in the actual village, it's crazy. It's something it's hard to describe at times because it's the equivalent of a university type campus, massive campus. It's got its own transit, so own bus system inside generally. It's got a massive dining hall. You've got washing facilities. You've got, every country generally has its own medical hub that has masseuses and physios and doctors and all that kind of stuff. And then you obviously have your own accommodation. You generally have a roommate, so 2 beds to a room. And they're just general apartments generally that are built. A lot of people buy these apartments off the plan before the Olympics, and then once the athletes are gone, that becomes their apartment to live in. But it was fun. It was very, very interesting. The biggest thing I remember was getting to the village, settled in, and then you start walking around and you see the finest specimens in the world walking around basically wearing nothing. And, for a young fella that's 19, 20, a lot of good-looking women there. It was a matter of going to the dining hall and getting a drink and an ice cream or whatever I got after my meal and just sitting on a equivalent of a park bench somewhere and just just watching the world go by. I mean, you got athletes and basically wearing the bare minimum, spandex, and kind of what we see today with what people are wearing in gyms, where nothing's really left to the imagination, put it that way. So that was interesting, and you've got the most in shape, kind of active people in the world all in one spot. So I do remember that, and that was definitely a fun part of it all. So moving on to the basketball, we, funnily enough, get no favors with the draw. We play Greece in Athens to open up an Olympic Games. So for those of you who don't understand what that means, they are some of the most passionate, abusive, whatever you want to call it, fans in the world, and I love it. I love that atmosphere. But it was intense. So we run out of the tunnel in Athens against Greece, opening night of the basketball Olympics, and we're getting railed from the moment the first person in our line as a team runs out. You know, we're getting swore at, we're getting, they're swearing and abusing so loudly, there's spit coming on us as we're running out of the tunnel. We're getting lots of malakas and all that kind of stuff. And they were passionate. They're a passionate fan group. They were singing songs during the game. They were jeering us, whistling whenever we had the ball. There was, I think there was a flare lit. Like, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I've come from college basketball, so I've seen some crazy stuff with student sections and all that stuff. But this was a whole nother level of passion that they have for their sport over there. Generally, especially in Europe, a lot of people don't have a lot of money, so when they get an opportunity to go to a sporting event, sporting game, they're not going to sit there and just watch the show. They're going to be part of the show, and that's what you respected about it. And it was an intimidating atmosphere. It was very, very loud, obnoxious, and Greece ended up, I believe they beat the shit out of us. We didn't play particularly well. I think a little bit rattled by everything going on, and they were a good team. They had a big fellow there that kicked my ass. It was my first foray into playing against a man strength type player. His last name was Papadopoulos. Just a big, strong guy. Wasn't athletic, just knew how to seal, knew how to use his body, and just kept putting me under the basket and just shooting little hooks over me, and couldn't really do much with him. And we ended up losing that game pretty convincingly. We go on then to play Angola. So basically the way the Olympics work, for those that don't know, you got 2 pools of 6 teams. Top 4 go through to the quarterfinals, and you cross over. So one from whoever finishes first in one pool plays 4 in the other pool, 2 plays 3, and so on and so forth. So we end up then beating Angola. So we're okay. We're 1-1. Our third game is against the US. So a tough task. We go in, we play pretty well. We have a pretty good performance. The MO on the US was you zone them as much as possible whenever it comes nut cutting time, meaning crucial possessions. It's a close game in the third or the fourth quarter. You would go zone, and a lot of countries had a lot of success. The game I spoke about earlier where Italy beat them, they zoned them the whole game. The US were a talented team. They had LeBron James, Allen Iverson, Carmelo Anthony, Tim Duncan, Amari Stoudemire, Stephon Marbury, Carlos Boozer. They were a tough team, but they didn't really have. They had a lot of good scorers, just bucket getters, but they didn't really have a feet set knockdown 3 that could, the equivalent of a Kyle Korver, someone that you just knew you couldn't leave. And in international basketball, you need a few of those on the floor at times. And so we end up being pretty close to them. We're zoning them for most of the game. Third quarter, we're up, I believe, at 3-quarter time, playing well. We're right there in it. And in the fourth quarter, I think it was Allen Iverson hit 3 threes in a row, and then Melo hit 1. And that's kind of what we're living and dying with. If that was the shot that they were going to take, we'd rather give you that than having Amari or LeBron on the rim dunking. So that was kind of the gamble that we took. So we ended up losing that game, but I felt like individually I had a pretty decent game. I just felt like I held my own against a lot of the best players in the world, Tim Duncans and Carlos Boozers, and played decently enough, and gave me a lot of confidence then with my sophomore year going back to college, which we'll talk about later on. But that was definitely a moment for me where I was like, I can compete against these guys night in, night out if I had the opportunity. I don't know. I know my body's not ready to do that yet, and that'll be another year or 2 away, but it was a real positive sign. So that then sets up a 4th game in the pool versus Puerto Rico. Must win for us. We were in a position where Greece was through, US was most likely going to get through, Lithuania was through. Those 3 were pretty much guaranteed. So it was out of us, Angola, Puerto Rico for that 4th spot. Angola hadn't won a game at that point, so we knew they were done, and we had their head-to-head against them even if they tied records with us. So Puerto Rico was the game. So if we beat Puerto Rico, we're 4th. We go through to the crossovers and get a top 8 finish. If we lose, we're basically out. Like, no matter what happens in that 5th game against Lithuania, Puerto Rico game trumps it because they'll have the head-to-head versus us. So we go into that game. We're playing pretty well. We're up at every quarter. I had to actually look up the numbers and the stats. We're up 78-74 with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And then I have a bit of a blown fuse moment. So we're up 4 with 5 minutes left. We ran a lot of horns type action, which means one big on one elbow, the other big on the other elbow. And Shane Hill would come off either side and we'd make reads according to that. But generally, if he came off a pick and pop shooter like a Matt Nielsen, Matty would pop and then they'd play accordingly. So it felt like 4 or 5 straight possessions was going back to Matt Nielsen on a pop of some sort, and he'd either shoot the jumper or drive the lane, and we missed basically 4 or 5 straight shots. And I was a little frustrated because I felt like the ball wasn't moving. I felt Matty was possibly being selfish at times and taking some bad shots, but probably overthought it a little bit. But maybe they were good shots within our system back then. Who knows? But there was definitely a halt to our offense. I was having a decent game individually. I think a few other guys were playing pretty well, but the ball just stopped moving and it became a kind of a grind in that fourth quarter, which it often does in a lot of games. But anyway, I felt like Matty was overdoing it. So come down, miss shot, come down, miss shot, come down, drives the lane, miss shot. And we're basically down with 40 seconds left. We're down 2 or 3. We come down for another crucial possession to tie the game or get within 1. And I think Matty shot a jumper and missed it. So I'm pissed at this point because I'm like, the ball stopped moving. We're playing a completely different style than we played in the first 35 minutes. So we then have to foul them, intentionally foul them to put them on the free throw line. And I remember we're at the free throw line. I'm at one side, ready to box out my guy. Matty's at the other side. First free throw is about to be shot. And I look over to Matty and I'm like, hey, Matty, why don't you come down and shoot the next shot again? And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? He was kind of in shock that I even said that. And I was like, yeah, man, I'll inbound the ball. I'll just throw it straight to you. You just dribble up and shoot it again, if you want to get some shots up. Because I felt like we were being a little bit selfish, and it was definitely the wrong thing to do and something that I shouldn't have done. But I remember it distinctly because I got in a lot of trouble after that for it. And it wasn't the right thing to do. I don't condone kind of what I did, but I did it. I'm going to be mad about it. And Matty and I got into it a little bit, but Matty was kind of more shocked about it. Like, this young fellow, what the hell is he doing? Even the Puerto Ricans that were lining up at the free throw were looking at me like, this dude's nuts. What the hell's going on? He's fighting with his own team. So Jason Smith kind of grabbed me at the free throw line and was like, man, just chill out, Bogues. Like, stop. So they were kind of in shock. So we get back to the locker room, and I can't remember if Brian Gorgon, the head coach, gave his post-game wrap up before or after, but it was dead quiet in there. We'd been knocked out of Olympic Games, essentially. We've got one game left against Lithuania in the pool rounds, which meant nothing. That's the worst position to be in when you're in Olympic Games or World Championships, playing for your country, and you're playing in a game that doesn't mean anything. Now, people will say any game for your country means something. I would agree to an extent, but you always want to be playing with a chance to further yourself in a tournament or a game or a final series or whatever it is. And we lost that opportunity. So we're out very quiet in the locker room. And I think it was Jason Smith and Tony Ronaldson, I think, were the two guys that basically said, hey, Bogut, that was some bullshit. You can't do that, man. Like, we don't do that. It's not part of our culture. And they were right, 100%. And I was fuming at this point. I took losses very, very hard as a young fella, worse than later on in my career. I mean, I ended up figuring out how to kind of tone it down after a tough loss where I'd be pissed after the game. But then the next morning, it's like, take a deep breath. All right, move on to the next thing. Whereas as a young fella, I'd let things fester and hold on to them for weeks, if not months sometimes. And so I'd be in my own head a lot. So I'm pissed after this game, still thinking that, we lost because of selfishness, but I didn't say anything in the locker room, just kept my mouth shut. Took my medicine from the veterans, got a little bit of abuse from them and warranted for sure. So we end up going back to the village, and it's kind of a bit of hostility in the air between myself and the rest of the group, just based on what I did and my actions, which weren't right. So the next day we have a day off, and then the second day after that we're playing Lithuania in a game essentially that didn't matter. So on that next day we didn't practice. So I'm like, okay, my parents were in Athens at the time, and my college coach Ray Giacoletti was in Athens at the time. So I decided I'm just going to get out of the village, just get out of here, which you could do, get out, go to Athens and just hang out with the family. My auntie from Croatia was also in town. So I do this, but not the right way. I end up not telling anyone kind of where I went, which definitely wasn't right. So if you left the village, you were just supposed to tell your team manager or someone that you're leaving. We're obviously in a in a foreign country. So they need to know where you are at all times in case something happens, right? So I don't do that. I just basically wake up in the morning, pack a little bag, bum bag type thing with a few supplies, wallet, phone, keys, passes, ID badges, and I just get out of there. I start walking out of our residences. I walk towards where the bus stop is, the in-transit bus that would then get on that bus that takes me to outside the village, get in the cab, go to Athens, downtown in the city of Athens, right? As I'm walking up, I'm on one side of the road on the footpath and I see Brian Gorgon on the other side. I guess he's coming from dining hall. I had headphones on, but I saw him kind of waving me over and I gave him nothing really. I kind of ignored it stupidly and just kept walking. And I was still so pissed off about being knocked out of the Olympics and the Olympic Games and all that stuff and the way it all went down. And so I kind of ignored him and just went and got on the bus and left the village, turned my phone off, didn't tell anyone where I was. And so I'm gone at like 9, 10 a.m. and I'm with my family and the whole day, kind of taking my mind off it. And I guess by like 3, 4, 5 o'clock, they're calling me. I'm not answering my phone. They're calling other people within the team. We had a few people that were staying outside the village. Have you seen Andrew? And so I finally get back to the village. It's dark. It's 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. Most of the guys are out and about. I don't see many people in the apartment or the dorm rooms, as you'd call them. And this would be where crisis meetings start about kind of my actions and the consequences. So I get a knock on the door to my room and Ken Shields comes in, sits on one bed, I'm on the other bed, and we start talking and he's kind of trying to talk me off the ledge a little bit, but also giving me a serve like what you did was bullshit. So rightfully so, but I'm still in that mode of, I don't want to hear this shit. I'm still pissed off about the loss. No one has addressed the actions that led to me going crazy. I kind of had that mentality, which was wrong. Probably over-exaggerated what happened late in that game, but I still feel like we went a little bit selfish. And so I was still kind of, fired up about all that. And it gets to a point where, we got to figure out, do you want to be part of this? Do you, are you remorseful about your actions? And I was kind of like, I wasn't showing too much remorse. I was that young, arrogant kid that was, fuck you, do whatever you want to do. I didn't swear at him or say anything like that to him, but it was that mentality of like, I basically just said, whatever you guys want to do, you're going to do. Like what I do right now is going to have no bearing on that, which was stupid. But if you're going to bench me, suspend me, send me home, do whatever you want to do. I really don't care at this point. We're out of the Olympics. We've got no chance of winning anything worthwhile. We're going to compete for 9th and 10th. Great, fantastic. I really don't care if I miss those games. And that wasn't the right attitude looking back, but a mistake I made and one I had to live with. So I guess Ken leaves that meeting and I don't hear anything till, the next morning essentially. So I find out what time kind of the vans or the buses are going to shoot around before our game against Lithuania. And I don't really hear much else. And I've got mixed reports about what exactly happened in those meetings with the leadership group. One is we'll talk to John Rillie a little bit later, who was a NBL player, played on the Olympic team, NBL legend. He was my roommate. So he was in the leadership group, so he can add some context to that. But I've spoken to a few assistant coaches and I've heard there was some people that were in the camp of putting me on a plane the next morning and sending me the hell home to Australia, or actually it was Utah. I would be going back to Utah, get me the hell out of there. There were some that saying I should sit out a game. There were some that said, look, he's young and stupid. He's 19. He handled it poorly, but he's 19. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. But I guess the end of the day, it's from the lens of whoever's telling the story. So I don't know to this day the exact truth. I've got numerous different versions of that story, but I do know that Basketball Australia was involved at that point, had received news that we want to send Andrew Bogut home and not have him play in the next 2 games of the Olympics. Basketball Australia pushed back on that and said, look, it's not the right decision. Worst case, just sit him on the bench, don't play him. I'm going to go on record right now and say if I was sent home on that plane the next day after that Puerto Rico game, it would have been my first and last Olympic Games. I doubt I would have played for the national team ever again. And look, that wouldn't have been the right thing to do. But knowing how fiery I was, especially in my youth, knowing the journey that if you've listened to the My Journey series from day dot, you'll know where I stood on myself and my journey within Basketball Australia and Basketball Victoria. It was not a positive journey for me. And I was almost looking for a reason to just bounce out of there. And if I would have been kind of shamed publicly and
that would have hurt my draft stock and my college stock. I never would have played for my country again, which would have been a very sad day. But I'll put that on record today. Like, it was that close. And is that the right mindset looking back? No, but I was a young, stupid kid that made a mistake. I needed to deal with some consequences, and I think it all ended up working out okay. You know, it was water under the bridge. I ended up playing the next game against Lithuania as per normal. Didn't play a lot against New Zealand in the 9-10 game. You know, it was kind of like, this is your medicine, cheer the team on. Cool. It wasn't really spoken about beyond that. But now that I've done some digging, what are we, 16 years, 17 years down the track, I've heard mixed reports. So basically there have been 2 points in my career where I could have ended up in Europe with a European passport playing for a team over there. One was if I didn't make the AIS in 2002. If I didn't have that opportunity, I would have went over there and trained with Tabona in Zagreb in the academy there, and God knows what could have happened from there with my national team career. And this was the second point where I was like, looking back, knowing how hot-headed I was and how much loyalty meant to me, that could have been a real big turning point. So just a small little detail that no one really knows. I mean, there's people that know the story about what went on with the Puerto Rico game and how I handled it and the back and forth, but no one knows kind of those details that I've come to find out these last couple of months researching this. So I hope you realize that I'm presenting this from a point of view where I was wrong. I definitely handled the situation in a way that is just not good for team culture and team harmony and all that kind of stuff. And the excuse I would give, if there is one, is I had no idea what team culture or team harmony meant at that age at all. I had no idea how important it was to set standards and have consequences to your actions. And I guess that was a big turning point for me, knowing that, you know, I'm eventually going to be the face of this national team and one of the main players. I need to conduct myself much more professionally than I have. And there was no one really that mentored me to do that. Jason Smith, John Rillie, those guys helped to an extent, but within a national team program, I'm only with them for 1, 2, 3 months, maybe max. And then you go back to Utah, where I'm looked upon as the leader of my college team with guys younger than me. So it's kind of one of those things about not really having the tools or being handed the tools to better equip yourself to handle those situations. And I don't, want people to feel sorry for me. I made the mistake, and that's why it's on this podcast and I'm airing it. I have no issue, airing dirty laundry about my mess ups in my life and my career. And that's a part of this journey. If this was a podcast where everything was rosy and everything was done perfectly, it wouldn't be what it is. So hope you enjoyed that story.
So now it's time for shenanigans again. So this is a fun part of all these Boomers trips. I mean, we're at the end of the day, we're all Australian on that national team and having a good time, having some drinks, some alcohol, and making a fool of ourselves is probably the next best thing we do as Australians at times. And this Olympics was none different. I remember we get back to the residences. There was a makeshift table that we made in the lounge room filled with bottles of all kinds of whatever you wanted, beers, spirits, wine. So guys were drinking whatever they wanted. And the other funny thing in an Olympic village is there's a McDonald's in every Olympic village I've been in. There's a McDonald's in there. It's free, obviously. What's crazy about it is a lot of countries that are from poorer cities, poorer countries in general. I mean, there might be individual athletes that are from a small village in a poor country that never seen a McDonald's, never tried a McDonald's. Some of these countries would just eat a McDonald's daily. It was absolutely unbelievable, right? They just be smashing McDonald's, and we kind of had a rule where we try to stay away from it for the most part. And once we were kind of essentially knocked out of a tournament of an Olympic Games, we'd then feast on McDonald's as well. So I remember getting back to the residences, all alcohol, and then there was just Macca's wrappers everywhere, just guys vegging out, which athletes do. I'm not going to lie. We definitely have our cheat few days, especially after winning or losing a championship or the end of the season. You definitely have that kind of few days or a week where you just do all the things you can't do in season. So that was funny. I remember a lot of partying, a lot of different things going on. There's not too much partying in the village because there's still there's some sports that don't finish up till the day of the closing ceremony. So you got to be kind of somewhat respectful, but there is, we always had an issue with, at least when I was involved in Olympic Games, was the swimmers. They would be done within the first 5 days, right? So there was one Olympic Games where we were in the same building as the swimmers, and they had all these signs up about please be quiet. Our swimmers need to wake up early. Their events are blah blah blah. So we try to be respectful and keep it down. And if for some reason someone was making noise, someone would come out and get on them a little bit and be like, hey, blah blah blah. You need to keep it down. The swimmers, please be respectful. So we were respectful for the most part. What killed me about the swimmers was that they were our elite medal chances generally every Olympics. So they had a bit of a swagger and an arrogance about them. Not all of them, but some of them definitely did. So their events would be over within 4 or 5 days, right? First 4 or 5 days of Olympics, swimming's done. But they'd stay on, obviously, till the team flight goes home after the closing ceremony. Now, basketball's every other day, and it starts on the day of the Olympics, first day, and basically you're playing right up till the end. So these swimmers, we'd be respectful of them. And then 5 or 6 days into this thing, once they're done, what do you think they're doing? That respect goes out the window because they're partying, they're drunk, they're doing doors banging, and it goes the complete other way. So I just remember that. But there wasn't a whole lot of partying on the village because of that. One night we get back at, I think it would have been, the sun was just coming up. So we get back one night and I'm with Paul Rogers, Rogie, and he was an awesome guy to be around, hilarious, life of the party type guy, fun. He was a star of the Perth Wildcats at the time. I remember we get back and I think someone in a different building from the Australian team, I don't know if it was might have been swimmers, might have been rowers, whoever it was, had a DJ booth they brought with them. So they were, obviously that was one of their passions or whatever it was away from their sport. They had a DJ kind of deck and whatever. And Rogie found out about this and we went over there and I remember standing next to him and he basically opens up the balcony windows, puts on the headphones, kind of drags the decks out to the balcony and just the speaker and just starts playing like he's a DJ to a crowd off a balcony, like you'd see at a festival at like 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. So there's some athletes that are awake going to get their breakfast. There's some athletes that now are waking up and like, what the hell's going on? It lasted for about 5-10 minutes. And the song, I still remember the song was God Is a DJ, which is a house electro techno type song. And he's just headphones on, eyes closed, just bopping away like he's spinning the decks. And you're just like, man, what are you doing? Hilarious story though, because like I said, the dude, he really thought he was DJ whoever at some big beach, festival that was DJing a crowd of 15,000 people, and it was just him off a balcony. So that was one funny story. Now, one cracking story I'll leave you with, and I don't think this story has source on it. I wasn't there, so I'm getting it firsthand from a few teammates. If you guys go out to a nightclub out in Athens somewhere, and there were a few of the Opals players there as well, the female women's basketball team. I think they'd probably medaled. I mean, they're a very, very good program and have had a whole lot more success than we have had. But we were pretty close with them. Obviously, basketball get along well. So we all go out. I don't go. I think I went and then left early to go somewhere else. A few of the guys remained, and there was a bit of a scuffle in the nightclub. I believe it was, funnily enough, Shane Heal, maybe Matt Nielsen, and a few other guys were there, and maybe Jason Smith, and they get a little tussle inside. It gets taken outside. Basically, they get thrown out. The other party gets thrown out. And the way the Greeks back in the day used to do things, they probably still do in Europe, if there's a scuffle inside the bar, they'll basically remove both of you and take you outside and be like, go for your life. Go for it. You want to fight? Let's see it. And they'd let people fight outside of the club. Don't do this shit inside around other people. You want to be heroes. And there's an argument to be said. Maybe that's the right way to go about things at times if people want to be disruptive and silly. But anyway, they get in a little scuffle. It goes outside and there's a few punches thrown outside. And I believe someone goes in a whack. One of the guys might have been Shane or someone from the side. And there's an Opals player there with them. Susie Batkovic, absolute legend. I love her to this day. I've been friends with her for a number of years. She's played in the WNBL, the WNBA, long-time Opal, just a legend of the game. Anyone that follows Australian women's basketball will know who she is. And I guess she saw someone coming in to do something from behind the back of another guy and basically gave him one or pushed him out of the way or just was like, hey, what are you doing? So then someone's come in and gave her one and basically punched her in the nose, in the face. And I believe cracked her nose, broke her nose. Now, I believe as an athlete, her nose has probably been broken a lot, much like mine. So it doesn't take a lot for us to break our nose. But nonetheless, her nose broke. And story goes and rumor swirls that she went up to the curb of a gutter basically and, bent down and smacked that thing back in place and was ready to get back on with it. So an absolute phenomenal story for Susie Bakovic. Like I said, if you're a fan of hers or know who she is, it kind of goes with her MO. She's a no-nonsense type lady. She's what you see is what you get. There's no bullshit about her, and that's how she goes about it. And that's my kind of person. So I loved her. But that story, I still remember to this stage. I remember seeing her at the Village and believe she had a black eye. I think Shane Heal had a bit of a shiner on him as well. But that was a little bit of shenanigans that went on later on in that campaign. All right, so we have a special guest to join us for this episode specifically. He was my roommate in the Olympic Village in Athens. John Rillie, welcome to the show.
Bogues, always good to catch up with you and loving your work in the podcast world.
Thank you. It's been a while. We'll go through John's history real quick. He was a former player in the NBL. A lot of NBL fans will know exactly who he was. A prolific scorer in the NBL. When I was a young fella, 12, 13, I'd be watching games, and John was always fun to watch, talking shit, going back and forth, making tough shots, and a real gamesman. So in the 90s, mid-90s with the Brisbane Bullets for a season, then went to Adelaide, late 90s, West Sydney Razorbacks for 5 years in the early 2000s, and then went over to the Townsville Crocs where there was some great battles there that I used to watch as a young fella, and finished it off in the NBL with the New Zealand Breakers. He's now a coach assistant coach at the UC Santa Barbara over in the States, and was at Boise State for 6 years before that. So an NBL champion in 98, all NBL first teamer, scoring champion in 03, and rookie of the year in 95. So a pretty good resume, and played overseas a few seasons, I believe, John.
If a few seasons equates to 4 or 5 months, yes, a few seasons.
Yeah, got all your pay on time, I bet.
Exactly. That's why I returned to West Sydney, because I was getting paid on time.
That's how it goes with Europe. It's always try to tell these young fellas, whatever's on paper, take away about half of it, and that's what you're guaranteed to get.
I would have been happy with half.
Tomorrow, your pay's coming tomorrow. That's what the Europeans are known for.
Yes.
Yeah, every time you go ask for your pay, it's tomorrow.
Still waiting.
Well, you made the Athens team in 2004, a long time ago. A lot of good memories. You obviously made the team. Did you expect to make that team going into that camp? I think it was about a 20, 25-man camp, if I remember correctly. The first one was at the AIS. Did you think you had a chance for that squad?
I think when you get to that stage, you always feel like you got a chance. I was fortunate enough to be part of Brian Gourjian's original team when he took over the squad. And when we went away, we had success. I played well. So I was quietly confident, because when you get to that level and that stage, you can't take anything for granted. And, I was always nervous until I got the call to say I was part of the team. But I was playing good at that stage in my career, so I was quietly confident. But because I'd been a part of some of the, like the 2000 process, and just my own career, until I got the phone call, I was never going to be 100% comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty big squad, a lot of kind of veteran players that had been in numerous campaigns, with Tony Ronaldson and Shane Heal and whatnot. So it definitely was a competitive squad. Seeing that this is a somewhat, slighted podcast towards myself and my journey, was this the first time that you kind of saw me? Had you heard about me before? What was your first impressions? All that fun stuff.
Thanks to your due diligence, I could think about this a little bit. When I first met you, it was actually at Alexandria in Sydney. You were with the national junior team, and it was the NBL off season, and quite a number of us would play there in the off season. So we were fortunate enough to play like yourself and Brad Newley as you guys prepared for the World Championships. Obviously, great memories for you, but that's actually when I first got in contact with you and kind of just monitored your success and progress from that day forward.
Wasn't that when we beat you guys?
I cannot remember the score, but there's no way that you guys beat us.
Oh, no, it was. You were the national team squad, right?
No, we're like the Red Phone Roughies,
Oh, you went there. Come on now. You had Shane Heal, you had Matty Nielsen. I just remember because we came up with our junior team. It was a kind of a half national team camp that Gorge put together, and we played you guys in a 2-game, a Saturday, Sunday. And I remember we beat you guys on the Saturday. Gorge was fuming, losing his shit. And then Sunday, you guys beat the absolute crap out of us. And I still remember because Matt Nielsen took out a few of my front teeth, and I had a, no shit, I had the bottom of my lip was on the outside was black. So I had like this chin strap on my, it looked like I finally had facial hair, but I definitely remember that weekend.
Yeah, now that you've refreshed my memory, maybe that first scrimmage was a little closer than I remember. But yeah, like that was my first interaction with you, and my first memory was your aggressiveness, your confidence in who you were and your abilities. Although when we're all young, you might get a little ahead of yourself. But if you don't have that ingredient, it's hard to be successful.
Yeah, I agree. It was a fun time. It was just great to compete against grown men. That was kind of my first foray into going against those kind of guys, which we later ended up being in the Athens camp a year later. But do you remember those gorging camps? How hard they were? I mean, I remember, man, like that was my kind of first time in men's basketball. But leading up to Athens, it was tour days that were actual tour days. Nowadays tour days are, I don't know what it's like in college, but one's a contact session, one's a little bit lighter, more shooting and kind of X's and O's. Whereas that was 2 sessions of 2.5, 3 hours of going at it.
Yeah, look, for me, I just looked at it as a great opportunity to be playing on that stage and making the most of my opportunity because, and I'm sure Gorge was the same way because 2002 Australia didn't qualify for the World Championships because we lost to New Zealand. Phil Smythe was the head coach of the national team at that stage, and I was absolutely no chance of the national team while Phil Smythe was the head coach there. So I was happy to kind of get another opportunity to play at that level when I was kind of probably in the peak of my career. So we could have practiced 12 hours a day and I was going to make the most of it. But yes, you're 100% correct with trying to do it these days. It would be really hard to do. But, Gorge was motivated himself in the fact that I remember him saying, well, we can't be the team that loses as well, So he was a motivated coach at that stage as well.
Yeah, and you had to be in shape. You had to be. I remember some guys would just end up dropping off towards the end of that camp. They just couldn't survive it. There'd be injuries. I mean, it was physical. It was brutal. But more as a young fella, you remember it because you're like, holy shit! Like gone from the junior level and a freshman year of college, which was intense. This was kind of a whole nother level, And I was with Rick Majerus, so gorgeous sessions. They made sure that we were one of the best in shape teams. We wore the heart rate monitors back when it wasn't cool. We did all that stuff, and I just remember for you, I mean, your fitness was never an issue. So neither was mine as a young fella, but as a big, it's a little bit different. You're that one out on the perimeter, kind of no contact, just pinging threes. We have to wrestle down there.
Yeah, and look, that's my whole career. I was just trying to be in the best physical shape I could be in. One, just because of my physical body, I wasn't the most physical guy in the world. But then as the camp went on, I felt like I could get better as the camp went on because I knew I was taking care of myself 12 months of the year. So I actually did look at it as a marathon, and the longer we went, the better chance I had of showing that I was in the condition that you needed to be in to keep Gorge happy.
Yeah, interesting time. So then we then flow on to go into that New Zealand series. I think it was a 3-game series over in New Zealand. It didn't mean anything as far as qualifying. We both qualified because, of course, New Zealand finished 4th in the World Championships in 2002. So it was more of a tune-up for both of us. But that was my first stint of international basketball at a organised level with referees and crowds and whatnot. And I'm not sure if you remember the series, but I just remember how physical it was. I didn't realize the rivalry with New Zealand at the time because we didn't really have it in juniors. They kind of sucked in juniors. We beat them by 40 or 50. And New Zealand came off an unbelievable few years in the early 2000s where, as you said, they beat the Boomers and qualified in 2002 and we didn't go. And that was kind of a dark patch in Australian national team history. But do you just remember how physical and how crazy that series was?
Yeah, absolutely, because it was an era where New Zealand basketball was gaining legs, and the guys on their team, kind of like the Australian team before that, a lot of those guys had come through the junior ranks together. So they had a lot of pride, just not for their country, but for them as a basketball team and carrying the flag for the sport in their country. So by the time that series had rolled around, I'm sure they looked at it as 1-1 because they'd beaten Phil Smythe. Gorge's group had beaten them one other time, and then we go pre-Olympics with that series. So I'm sure they felt like, hey, let's go into the Olympics with some good momentum. And then as you find out, once you get to that level, anytime Australia and New Zealand plays each other, it really doesn't matter where each country sits in the scope of things. It's going to be on.
Yeah, even if you're playing marbles, right? I mean, it's one of those rivalries that I mean, you probably equate it to the US and Russia back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. But yeah, I just remember asking the ref a few times in that series, like, we playing rugby or basketball? Like, what are you refereeing? Because Perro was a unit. Perro Cameron was, 6'6" at the best of times, and just a big nugget of a guy that would just set massive screens and could shoot the ball. And I just remember, I was only 230 pounds then, 100 kilos, barely 105 kilos. And I just remember coming out of those games like, these guys are nuts.
Yeah, and Perro was really the barometer for their physical play. And then, the advantage of them playing on their own soil, they got officiated very user-friendly like during that series. So, for them, they needed to have that about their game because, from top to bottom, they probably weren't as good at basketball players. But if they could wear us down or get us a little frustrated with the whole situation, then it becomes, more of an even ball game for them.
Yeah, they had to junk it up and be physical, and that kind of leads me into, do you remember the first game and Dylan Boucher and what he did to me?
Look, all through my national team career, when you played New Zealand, that was something that they obviously wanted to do, was attach himself to the rookie, try and intimidate him, and obviously yourself being a vocal point of where we were going with the national team. They felt if they could get under your skin through that, but I look, as I got to know you, I think more times than not, it actually motivates you and actually rises your awareness to what the occasion really is.
100% agree, but it just would have been nice if you could have told me that pregame, because I didn't know what the hell was going on. Because I just remember that haka ending, and I was like nose to nose with him, and I'm like, "Fuck you, I'm not moving." And then he wasn't moving, and then I just remember the whole crowd standing up and cheering. And it was like, holy crap,
Oh, man, but how juiced are you and how ready are you going? It just gets you ready. Now, obviously it's a great thing that New Zealand has going with the haka, but just the energy it brings to the arena is unbelievable.
Oh, no doubt. It was a great experience. And I still remember it to this day. It was awesome. But into that New Zealand series, do you remember the ongoings Yep, the ongoings. I spoke about it briefly before having you on, but we're in Dunedin, right? Dunedin, however you pronounce it.
No, I believe we were actually in Invercargill, the most southern tip of New Zealand before you hit the Antarctic.
Oh, there you go. I had it wrong, so I might need to adjust that. But yeah, I remember there was one pub in town, and it was the end of the series. I had that right, yeah?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, it was the end of the series, and it was, I guess, everyone that was involved in the game, players from both teams, coaches. There was even the people that were, producing the games, the music people, the arena people. They were all at this one pub because it was the only place in town. And I just remember, I didn't have much drinks that night. I don't think you weren't a drinker by nature. You'd be on the orange juices for most of the night. But I just remember somehow there was a game between the New Zealand team and us of who could throw the most darts at each other shirtless. And I just remember being a young fellow like, this is crazy. And it goes with that Boomers culture of, there was so much crazy stuff that happened on tours, but I just remember walking out of that place and going back to the room, and I don't know who it was that was up there, but they had a dart hanging out of their chest. Do you remember that?
Yeah, look, I do remember that moment because just like you, it was a social gathering for everyone kind of really involved in that game. Players, New Zealand basketball Australia, people that were involved in that series. It was just kind of an opportunity to, reminisce about the games and talk about the Olympics and move forward. And as you said, at some stage of the night, you look over and there are Aussies and Kiwis trying to figure out who's still the toughest guy, and they got their shirts off and they're throwing darts at each other in the chest, stomach area. And as you said, there was one bloke that still had a dart stuck in his gut as we were leaving.
Yeah, it was fun times as a 19, 20-year-old thinking this is my first digs in a national team campaign. And I'm like, I'm good. I'm not taking a dart in the chest. And I'm like, I hope no one has any underlying health conditions, because it was a good way to pass it around.
Did you ever think of taking that back to Salt Lake City with yourself?
Definitely not. That was not one. I was more of the pranking guys and doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, that one, I was even shook by that one. And I've done some crazy shit in my lifetime. And that was just like, wow, these guys are, and this was like veteran guys on the team that were, that were just going absolutely crazy. But, another one I spoke about that I might flag with you. I didn't have it on the run sheet for you, so I'll shock you. Do you remember we we have our last Gold Coast camp before we take off to home for 3 or 4 days and then go off to Italy for the pre-tour. And I remember we were at, I don't know, I think it was the casino on the Gold Coast. We'd gone on that little boat trip, had some drinks and a barbecue, and then we'd gone back to the casino and the bar was pumping. We couldn't get a drink. And Catalini, who was the life of a party, I loved him. I thought he was awesome on that tour as a young fellow because I used to watch him as a kid and then being around him. And he decided to jump over the bar and pour himself a jug of beer. Were you there that night?
I was not, but that does not surprise me with Cat. I was lucky enough to be a teammate of his for 3 years in Adelaide, so he knew how to enjoy himself, that's for sure.
Yeah, I just remember it because we all got booted out by a big Maori fella, and we kind of all had to leave with Cat. We didn't want him by himself, but we end up then going home. We pack. We go on to the tour of Italy. So my first kind of tour of the national team, and we get told we're both confirmed that we're in the national team, and we get told, hey. Great to make the team. Congratulations. Put some sort of act or song or something together for your rookie night. And I'm thinking, what do you mean rookie night? I thought they were taking the piss out of me. And they're like, yeah, you need to do something. It's Boomer's tradition. And we get told that we have to do something. And I remember being more nervous about that than the Olympic Games. And I think that was your first actual meaningful campaign where you had to do the rookie night with us too, right? Do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely. Once you got to play in either a world champion or Olympics, the rookies, irrespective of age, you had to, do a skit or, bring something to the team to kind of show a different side of you. And I remember that poolside. I pulled out I was hoping to do a comical poem. I put a few bars together, sonnets, whatever those things are called. And Paul Rogers was not a fan of what I'd written, so him and I actually put a little time and effort into it and wrote a poem that really highlighted everyone associated with the program, one of their attributes. Whether it was Gorge's crooked finger or, Choco always coming from, an underprivileged area or something like that.
Yeah, and that's what Dave Anderson and myself did with the Working Class Man, Jimmy Barnes song. Probably shouldn't have chose to sing because I'm a horrible singer, but we rewrote the lyrics and took the piss out of everyone in the room essentially. But what an amazing backdrop for a rookie night. I still remember that was kind of my first foray into something nice, being with the national team, and I wore cliff top down in the southern part of Italy, Mediterranean kind of right below us, and good times.
No, look, that resort we stayed at was, one of the best I've been around in all my life, and I've been lucky enough to stay at some nice places. But that was a great backdrop, great night, and as you said, it was a nervous occasion because you wanted to do a good job, but it was really taking you out of your own comfort zone.
Yeah, and I mentioned that CJ's was probably the worst. I got to get him on one day to talk about that. He basically read that when you forget where you parked your car joke that. I think it was in some movie, and everyone was like, man, did you just read that off a script? But he got away with it. So anyhow, we move on from there. We played pretty well in that tournament. I think we finished second in that tournament, lost to Italy in the final, I believe. Was that right? Yep.
If I'm thinking of the same one, we played Brazil the first game.
Yep. And then we ended up playing okay. And Italy went on to then beat the US in that in a lead up friendly as well going into the Olympics. So whenever someone beat the US, that was big news. So we got a hold of that.
Yes,
we got a hold of that.
You're
tape.
Correct. Yeah,
which actually
great memory.
Yeah, which actually put us in a position to almost beat them, which we'll talk about later. But we then move on. We get to the Olympic Village. We settle in. Get all our, you just remember getting all your gear, getting all your fittings, your shoes, your opening ceremony stuff. And I guess what were your first impressions of kind of settling into an Olympic Village, your first and last Olympics?
Yeah, so once you hit the village, for me, your head's on a swivel because you're around the world's best athletes in every sport. So I'd never been in an environment like that. But then once you check in and you see some of the other world-class athletes there, it was time to go and get your gear and all of that kind of stuff. And then I remember walking through that warehouse, getting, all the different pieces of clothing and items, and everything has, something with Australia on it or the emblem and all of that kind of stuff. And that just is when, for me, it really started to sink in that, being part of the Olympics is really something special.
Yeah, I agree. I remember just getting so much gear that you didn't even know what you were going to do with half of it. And I think I still have some of that to this day, but I remember getting to the village and just seeing kind of all the different athletes and just peak bodies that were just in the best physical shape, and a lot of people wearing not much. You talk about active wear today. I mean, the Olympic Village was active wear, probably the initial place where active wear started. But man, it was just crazy being around world class tennis players and soccer players and basketball players.
Yeah, and I don't want to hopefully spoil too much of what we're going to talk about, but when you're in the village, there's track and field, there's weightlifting rooms. Like you don't have to leave the village to get a good workout in, and every day I would go and work out myself to stay in some type of game shape. But then I would just sit at the track and watch Addo Bolden, Maurice Green, these guys warm up and what they go through in their preparation, because it's just great to watch people of that ilk and see how they become successful. And if you can take anything away from them, watching boxers try and make weight, so they're on the treadmill in the alfoil outfits, just trying to drip sweat so they can make their weight. Like it really was an unbelievable mix of athletes, and just seeing how everyone gets to their peak performance in different ways.
One thing I remember, do you remember Michael Phelps was there, yeah?
I do not remember that at all.
I believe he was there, and I believe I could be wrong, it might be the next Olympics, but I remember his diet was crazy because all he would eat was chicken nuggets from McDonald's.
Yep.
And then he would just go out and win every gold medal.
You talk about Maccas. I can tell you that Addo Bolden and Maurice Green, on the day that they were running for the gold medal, they were eating Big Mac meals.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it because you're probably in the same boat as me, but even if I ate McDonald's on a game day and it did nothing to me, it would just mentally drain me because I'd just be like, I've done wrong. I shouldn't have done this. And then it just plays some mental mind games with me going into a game.
Yeah, but like, and for your listeners out there, like there's a Macca's in the dining hall that you have access to pretty much 24/7. So, if you couldn't have some self-restraint, you could do some damage in the Olympic Village.
Yeah, and most of the times for us, the rule was that once we're kind of done, and most athletes, you're knocked out of your event or your tournament, then you go crazy on Macca's for a couple of days. But I just couldn't believe, like you said, that there was some athletes that were it was part of the daily regime. And look, the food in the dining hall outside of Macca's wasn't the greatest at times, but yeah, you could definitely get caught up in it. But that's just something you got to battle with. We move on. We move on to our opening game. So it was against Greece, in Athens, Greece. They do us some good favors with the scheduling there. I just remember that game. I mean, what are your first memories of that game?
Yes. So I'd played in Greece a couple years before that. A couple of those guys on their team were teammates. So, I'm sure for the Aussies in 2000, when you're the host, there's a lot of expectation. But then on our side, it was a great way to get into the Olympics. If you come away with a win, I think that, lays a great foundation for us moving forward with our own aspirations. But if anyone's been to a sporting event in Greece, the atmosphere, just not the fans being fans, but the sideshows that go along with it, like the atmosphere, as you said in your notes to me, like it's always going to be hard to beat that atmosphere. And the arena was probably only about 12,500 people, I believe. But, them just getting introduced, I remember the stadium, it wasn't the same, but it had the same buzz as walking into the Olympic Stadium on opening ceremony night.
Yeah, man, I came back from college freshman year and played in, the BYU Utah rivalry games, and that's their crazy atmospheres. This to me was like, it wasn't an 18,000 seat arena. It was only 11, 12,000, but I just remember running out and just from running through those tunnels, basically they were yelling so much, they were spitting on you. You heard a lot of malakas. You heard there were chants, there were drums, they were throwing confetti.
Yep.
And you're just like, wow, these people, like, they live and breathe this. So, like, I've spoken to teammates of mine that have been in, really serious life and death situations in Europe during and after games. And that's how they kind of treat sport over there. It's like, we're going to toe the line and do the what we can really do to rattle them without killing them, and that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And as a 19, 20-year-old, you're like, oh my goodness, you hear stories, but once you're actually on that court, it was crazy.
Yeah, and that, like, even when I was fortunate enough to play over there, the smoke, the drums, the flags, just the atmosphere, and grown men hanging over the sideline, virtually doing everything bar saying that he wants to kill you to create the atmosphere and try and intimidate you.
Shaking the basket stanchions in Serbia, they used to.
Yep.
Alex Maric, a teammate of mine, played over there. He said there'd be a dude, in their rivalry games, shaking the basket while the other team's shooting free throws. And you're just like, man, and that's just the way it is over there. But we end up getting pounded. Funnily enough, we lose by a fair bit to Greece, and I remember the big fella there tormented me. He was Papadopoulos, I think was his name, and he was just a solid big, just knew how to use his body, wasn't athletic, just a typical veteran European player, and just demolished me all on just seals, just using his body. And that was a wake-up call for me to get in the weight room a little bit more, which I was working on, and I just couldn't put it on all my freshman year. But we ended up moving on. We beat Angola, so kind of an easy beat for us. So we ticked the box there, and we're like, okay, we're moving on. We get to the USA, and this was an interesting game for us. We went in kind of thinking, hey, we can kind of challenge these guys a little bit. We got that tape from the Italy game, and we end up going basically with 70-80% of the game we played zone, and we played pretty well. We were, I remember we were up 2 going into the fourth quarter, and we stayed in that zone. And unfortunately for us, Allen Iverson wasn't shooting the ball well that tournament. They had a bunch of different lineups. They had a superstar team, but nothing was meshing. And then he exploded in that fourth. He hit 2 or 3 threes for him. Then Melo hit a 3, and then we ended up losing by 10. But what do you remember about that game?
Yeah, it was one of those games where the zone was very effective for us for the majority of the game. But from the vantage point I had, you would have hoped we would have been able to somehow get a bigger lead instead of just being happy to have like a lead. The thing that I remember about that game, this was the US had D Wade, Carmelo, and LeBron. But it was coached by Larry Brown, and those guys were pretty much rookies. And Larry Brown is well known for not wanting to play his younger guys. But those guys got to play in the second half, and the athleticism and speed on the court just increased to a whole new level when those guys were on the floor. And I think that's when the momentum swing back into their favor. Because, as you said, for the majority, first 3 quarters, you would have said we had good momentum in that game. But I just remember when, particularly LeBron, the distance and the space he covered on the floor just brought a different dynamic to their defense. And like for us, we've just become a little more hesitant and cautious about the passing and our shot selection and stuff like that. But then, as you said, Iverson, which he's done throughout his whole career, stepped up and made some threes. Not the world's greatest shooter, but he has played on the big stage and made big shots in his career. But look, we did our best. I just felt when we did have momentum, we needed to try and create a bigger lead, against them.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, because you knew the run was eventually going to come, like with all good teams. And if you don't have that buffer, especially when it tightens up, and they're, like you said, the Iversons of the world are used to playing in those, crunch time minutes and making big shots, you want to have an extended lead. But that game then sets up our 4th game of the pool round. Now, this is against Puerto Rico. Essentially for us, it's a must-win to advance. We had one more game after that against Lithuania, and they were looking like they would finish 1st or 2nd in our pool. We get to that Puerto Rico game. I remember we knew what was at stake, and this is where I individually got into a little bit of an issue, or a big issue essentially at the time. We're up basically at all quarters. We're moving the ball, we're sharing it. We're up in the 4th quarter. We're up 78-74 with 5 minutes left. I had to go look all this up because I couldn't remember exactly, but I knew we were up. The game ends up finishing 87-82 for them, so it means we scored 4 points in the last 5 minutes. I guess, do you remember me going crazy at Nelly? I mean, that's kind of my feeling was that we ran that shakes action dry for the last 5 minutes of that game. Ball stopped moving. It felt like it was the Shane Heal, Matt Nielsen show, which it was. It might have just ended up like that most possessions, and I don't think it was strategic, but it's just the way it ended. And it felt like, Matty was taking a fair few shots and missed a fair few, and that's how it goes. But as a young fella, I was kind of frustrated about, we lost this game because there was no more ball movement and we took some bad shots. And I remember, I spoke about it at length of kind of going at Nelly on the floor, which you weren't on the floor at the time, and basically saying, hey, Nelly, why don't you dribble Ollie inbound at 2 yards, just dribble the ball up and shoot it again with 40 seconds left. And Jason Smith kind of pulled me aside and said, chill out. But do you remember kind of the lead up to all that?
I don't remember the exchanges you guys had on the floor. The thing that I remember about that game is it, it really come down to whether that would turn into a medal possibility for us or not. We, as you said, we had great momentum. The way we were playing, you felt like we were going to win the game, and then it did. The momentum of the game changed. I don't remember it like you, because I wasn't on the floor. I hadn't even played a minute in the Olympics at this. So what I was doing on the sideline, I was like, look, I got to be a good teammate. I got to try and make this a great experience for me. I'm just going to suggest things. I believe the coaching staff believed in my basketball IQ and what I saw in the game. So to the assistants, I just give different ideas. And I do remember, the flow of the game, whatever the flow was, we kind of changed what our attack or what our purpose was of going at Puerto Rico. And it was nearly like we hit the skids. There's you mentioned three guys that are all pretty confident in their own abilities. So I would like to be a fly on the wall at the free throw line when you guys were talking about it, though.
Yeah, I think Nelly was more in shock, because I was somewhat quiet in Athens. I was kind of trying to fit in with the vets, and I wasn't as vocal as obviously I am later on in my career. But I think Nelly was more stunned. He kind of said, what? Like, what are you talking about? And I repeated it again and went passive aggressive and said, yeah, mate, I'll just take the next 5 shots. You might as well. You've taken the last 10 or whatever, and exaggerated a little bit. And I remember Jason Smith was in the free throw line box outs with me. Even the Puerto Ricans were looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with this dude? He's going crazy. I mean, the game was over at that point. Yeah. There was 30 odd seconds left, and we were down by. We were in hack mode where we had to foul and put them on the line and come down and knock a 3 just to make it a game. But I remember getting to the locker room and I'm like, oh shit, like I'm in some trouble. I'm a fiery guy. But as soon as I did it, I'm like, oh, here we go. Something's going to happen here. But I was just so pissed that we lost, and that was kind of, I guess it's kind of hard to relay that in that moment. Like, I handled it wrong, but fuck, like we should have won the game. So we get back, and I think it was Jason Smith and Tony Ronaldson I know Tony was fuming with me, and Tony wasn't playing a lot, and rightfully so. He had a right to kind of be pissed off because he's like, this young fella's taking it for granted. But they had a crack at me after the game, and I kind of took that on the chin. I didn't say much. I was kind of in my shell, and do you just remember the kind of the aftermath? I don't remember if it was either before or after Gorgin's talk, but Gorge didn't really address it. Left it up to the players.
Yes, I remember it's like it's one of those things that you address when the moment's nearly past. Like we all knew that was our shot at getting in the final 8, chance of medaling, and obviously a lot of people disappointed. I'm sure some guys were feeling it was their last Olympics. Some guys were thinking it's their chance to show that they're on the international stage and a good player. So there's a lot of emotion that goes into it. You being a young guy and no one probably really knowing who you were probably sent a lot of mixed messages in like your body language, whatever words you spoke, a lot of pride in the locker room. So something, it needed to be addressed. I thought it was addressed, but I think it grew a little further from there, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it did. I mean, the next day we had an off day. We're basically out of the Olympics. We had one game left, I think, which was 2 days after that Puerto Rico game. And I had then was like, I need to get out of the village, like for my, kind of my well-being. I'm going to do something stupid. I'm going to say something stupid. Let me just get the hell out of here. My parents were in the village at the time, in Athens at the time. So I had decided I'll just pack my little bum bag, pack some shit, and just start walking towards the bus terminal. And I remember walking past, kind of Gorge was across the road from me. I had headphones on, and I kind of saw him waving me down, but I was still like, as a young fella, I guess all athletes go through it. I hung on to shit too long. A bad loss like that or a run-in, I could hold on to that for weeks or months, like it was that crazy. It's just something that you had to work on as you kind of got older. And I remember him waving me down and I just gave him nothing and kept walking. So I'd exited the village, turned my phone off and just went rogue essentially. And that was in the morning. So then I kind of figured that they would be like, where the hell was Bogut at? We haven't seen him all day. He's gone off the reservation. And then I finally turned my phone on when I was in the taxi back to the village at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. And I think that then poured fire on the whole situation, which was 19, 20-year-old stupid decision on my part, but something that I had to live with. But I remember getting back to the village. I think you were there in my room and you're like, mate, kind of you gave me a little like, settle down, it'll all be all right. And then for me, it was crisis meetings. I've got mixed reports. So I've talked and met with numerous people that were both coaches, assistant coaches, support staff, and players. And I've got 2 or 3 different stories. What was kind of your inkling on what was going on?
Yeah, this is one of the things incidents that I really remember pretty good from the Olympics. And then, when you become a coach, these are the situations that you need to understand how to handle and deal with and all of that. And back then, that was kind of the era when like leadership groups started. The word culture was becoming like a catch cry. So we had like a leadership group with the Boomers. So those guys got together. Obviously, a lot of people disappointed in like your behavior, immaturity of how you handled the situation. And from that, a lot of speculation goes on as to what is going on in Andrew Bogut's life, because you're 19 years old, you had you hit the international stage very well, statistically pleasing. Everyone could see that you were going to be a very good player in the future and be a multi-time Olympian, let alone an NBA player and the number 1 pick. So as the older guys in the leadership group talked about this, and I was only ever involved with players. And, do we all wish we handled different situations better? Absolutely. But the one thing I said is let's think if we were 19 years old, just going through what you had gone through, would we be handling it any different? And it's easy for guys, veterans, to look at it in a lot of different ways, but you also have to look at what someone is dealing with, how they dealt with it, and have they ever had to deal with it before. So I had no idea, because obviously there was a lot of talk about, well, we don't need him on the team. Well, let's not start him next game. It's bullshit that a 19-year-old guy thinks he can behave like this. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure how many 19-year-olds from Australia had ever gone through, what you were going through at that time. And I don't even know, maybe some of the external things that were pulling at you as well, because you have a European passport, you're a very attractive player. So, that's my recollection of it. And if I remember correctly, you started against Lithuania.
Yeah, to cut it short. But I mean, look, I heard that I'd met with Ken Shields, had come into my room, basically booted you out. We had a little powwow with Ken, and he was kind of, I guess I was still fuming about it. He went at me a little bit about kind of disappearing for the day, and then was like, mate, you're going to be an NBA player. This is going to be an X on your name for attitude. You don't want that. And I kind of was still a bit pouty and was like, yeah, whatever. I basically remember saying, like, you guys do whatever you want to do. Like, if you guys want to send me home, if you want to suspend me, if you want to not start me, do whatever you want to do. And I guess he was then pissed because he's like, I wasn't showing that much remorse. And from what I'd heard is there was a split camp in the coaching staff about sending me home completely, not even playing against Lithuania or New Zealand. There were calls with Basketball Australia at the time with the board. The board was obviously had a long-term view, and knowing kind of, I guess, back to your point, my history with Basketball Australia wasn't great. I never made any of the teams. I was always
kind of shunned, and I was already on knife's edge with Basketball Australia, just because I thought it was me versus the establishment, as you do as a young fella, and it's it then ended up I mean they basically, I think BA kind of made the smart decision and said, well, if we do this, what are the repercussions in the future? And I can go on record and say, if they would have booted me off that team halfway through the tour, I would have got drafted still somewhere, and I would never have played for Australia again, because I'm a fiery, stupid kid at 19, 20, and who knows what would have happened from there. But I think it worked out long term. I made my mistake. I took my kind of medicine, but I know there was a point where it could have went either way. But like you said, I started against Lithuania, played really well individually. We lost that game, and then didn't play much against New Zealand, and that was obviously a send off for Shane Heal and a few other guys in their last campaign, Tony Ronaldson, Paul Rogers. So it was an interesting time, and it was, there were a lot of things going on in my life which aren't an excuse with how I handled myself, but it definitely could have went two different ways.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of discussion about what was the right way to handle it. And obviously, water under the bridge and you playing for Australia was probably a beneficial thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I guess the point of this podcast and my journey, was rogue at times, which is the name of the podcast, obviously, but it wasn't traditional, and I made a shitload of mistakes, which I put my hand up for, and that's kind of the important thing of looking back and saying, I was a bit of a dickhead and I made some mistakes, but I guess it's more to show young kids that are listening and parents, and there's going to be speed bumps. You'd know that as a recruiter for a college. There's going to be kids that have marks on their name, but do we look deeper into, well, maybe there's, the parents got divorced at a certain age, maybe they got bullied at high school, whatever it is, right? It's not an excuse, but you got to kind of look into the baggage sometimes. And I think, at least in Australia, it's getting better, but back then it was real easy to ride kids off just based on 2 or 3 instances.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So you live to fight another day.
That's it. Anyhow, we move on. So we end up, Lithuania and New Zealand were kind of pointless games for us for the most part. You never want to get to an Olympics competing for 9th and 10th. I can tell you that. That's kind of pointless. So we go through all that. I guess I know you were probably a little frustrated at times during the campaign. I know you were, utmost professional, but you had to have been thinking that you could have got in some games just with your shooting ability, but it just wasn't meant to be. I mean, talk about how you kind of handled that and made sure you stayed positive.
Yeah, so kind of like what I touched on before is, basketball is the only event that goes for the 2 weeks, so you have every other day off. What I would do is outside of our team practice, because team practice was pretty light, the walkthroughs and all of that. So I would use the facilities on the Olympic Village. So I knew if I did get the opportunity, I was going to be in the best possible shape I could be in to make the most of my opportunity. And after the first couple games, when I could kind of see how this was going, because look, it's a 40-minute game. There's 12 guys. Not everyone's going to play. So I guess after I just kind of had my little silent moment where I was disappointed, then I was like, well, what can I do to try and help this team? And I just felt like what I could potentially see from the bench, if I could relay that message to Choco or Ken Shields and they got Gorge's ear, maybe it helps us win. Because the thing about it all is there's never been an Australian team to win an Olympic medal. So to be a part of a team that could win an Olympic medal, that's the thing that I always kept in the back of my mind. And as I tell players today, at some stage you're going to get an opportunity, so you better be ready to take that opportunity. So I wanted to stay ready and be ready for the opportunity when it come. But then the other thing I did, I tried to go and watch as many Aussies or go to Olympic events that I really appreciated and liked. So I could get some type of reality check going and seeing other people go through what they go through.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good message. I think it's something that's really important, that you're not always going to get the playing time you want. But I mean, I saw a lot in the NBA, a lot of times those 11, 12, 13 guys will take that opportunity for granted, get thrown in a game and first possession, screw up a scouting report straight away that was like a point of emphasis, and then they come out of the game, they don't play again for a month, So I think it's a very important message and a good one. But move on to the fun and the shenanigans that happen at the end of an Olympic Games. I remember we play our game against New Zealand. We win that. We go back to the village, and I remember converting our lounge room essentially was converted into an area just full of drinks. I think we snuck some drinks in there, and there was a bunch of liquor, and guys started drinking, and there were a few things that happened. I think the first one that I remember that I put in the notes, I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the Bakovic story?
I remember the story, but I was not around for that doozy. But yeah, once again, three, Bakovic, Shane Heel, and Nelly, Matt Nielsen involved in an incident that I guess Susie come and saved the day for him, huh?
Yeah, well, basically ended up getting her nose popped out of place by someone, a rogue Greek bloke at a bar, which she was helping Nelly and Shane. And I wasn't there neither, so I hear it secondhand, but I can confirm that Susie had a shiner the next morning. So I'm pretty sure that was from the broken nose. That was one of the fun ones. You and I went out to a pub. I'm not sure if you remember that. We went out to a pub. I don't know where it was. We caught the train together. I remember you had your bucket hat on. I had, whatever I was wearing, some dumb outfit that a 19-year-old wears. And I think I got into it with a fella from New Zealand. I think it was a javelin throw or something, was just in me. I don't know what it was in me about, but I remember a little scuffle ensued, and I threw one on his chin, and we kind of left after that. Do you remember that?
I do. You got into the little scrap, and then me and Pero Cameron were talking with each other, because I got to know Pero a little bit. Not a guy I was going to fight with was Pero, but he knew the New Zealand guy that you landed one on. So he comes over and he kind of just picks both you guys up and shakes you off a little bit and says, "Calm down, you idiots. You wanted to, flex a little bit, but we resolved the issue. Pero was very cordial, and we just moved on about our night." But, I look back at that incident, and as you do your podcast and that, that's one of those things when, I remember the guy, I don't remember what the guy said, but he was pretty much having a crack at you because you were young and you had a good Olympics. And then Pero was there obviously trying to help his Kiwi buddy out. But we got it taken care of, and, no harm, no foul.
Yeah. And I remember the Greek security, they had a really good process over there where they would basically see any scuffles and remove both of you, and then be like, "Hey, continue it outside then."
Yep. Yeah.
They did that, and then the bloke calmed down, and it all kind of was water under a bridge. But I do remember that, hanging out with you as a roomie. I mean, anything else you can remember, like your fondest memories of that tour, or anything else that we've missed?
Oh man. Well, for me personally, I scored 2 points at the Olympics, and it was against Lithuania. And as I shot it sounded like the referee's whistle. And the game, everyone kind of stopped except for me, and I shot the ball. And it ended up being a guy in the crowd with like one of those whistles or something. So as they kind of were figuring out what was going on, I was like, come on, I can't get my only bucket of the tournament taken away from me here. So fortunate enough, I scored it. I got 2 points at the Olympics. The other thing, that I remember and I'll always hold fondly is the amount of games that you and I just went and watched outside of Australia. Like, I don't know whether you remember, but like whether you were there or not, I would have went and watched every game of basketball at the Olympics. But as you and I got to understand each other, I could see that you really appreciated watching a lot of good basketball. And just sitting there, because Argentina won, they were very good. Italy got second and the US third. So, I just, from that moment on, I was like, man, like this kid really likes hoops. He's going to be successful. So that's a fun memory. The other one was Utah got a new head coach in between, Ray Giacoletti.
Yep.
And I actually know Ray, still talk to him to this day. And I remember I had to find a way to get him into the Olympic Village so he could weave his magic to convince you that you could be a success at Utah under him as a coach.
Yeah, because the transition happened while I was at the Olympics. He'd just flown to Australia a month before to meet my parents. He did that on the first day that he got his job. We talk about it actually in episode 4. We actually get him on, which is great. And it was an interesting time. But look, JR, John Rillie, whatever you want to call it, you've been obviously a big part of my career, being that calming influence, and my roommate. We kept in touch ever since you kind of went your way, I went my way from that Olympic team. You've been kind of coaching more in the States. I've been all over the world. We've kept in touch. You were the innovator with the podcasts. I'll give you the shout out. You were, what year was your podcast? What year was it?
2009.
2009, man. 10 years ago, before no one even knew what a podcast was, and yourself and DJ Rod up there in Townsville. I came onto your show and you've returned the favor, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, no worries at all. They were fun times, and I enjoy coming on these and every week listening to yours. So good luck with it all, and good luck with your career after being on court.
Afterlife. Thanks, JR.
No worries. Thank you.
Wrapping that campaign up, it was an honor to play with a lot of those legends, even though at times they probably didn't think that I appreciated it as much as I should have. I definitely remember the quirkiest things like those stories I just told you and the different things that those guys did. But a lot of those guys were integral to the program's tradition and culture, and the rookie nights and all those things that continue to go on to this day. They were an integral part of it. Your Shane Hills, your Tony Ronaldsons, your Jason Smiths. So I really appreciated that. And look, our program was essentially going into a transition period because a lot of those legends were gone. I was kind of the face moving forward of the national team, and besides myself, there wasn't a whole lot of penciled in makes for the national team moving forward. We didn't really know kind of who would be the next guy. I mean, Dave Anderson, myself, maybe a few other guys. Jason Smith got a few more campaigns, but it wasn't a case of the 90s. Early 2000s boomers where you knew 9 out of 12 guys were locks to make the team, and the other 3 were coin flips. But move on from that. Anyhow, fly back directly from Greece with all my shit, 3 bags, got a bunch of new Olympic gear, which was great because I didn't have a lot of clothes, didn't have a lot of money, so I had a bunch of Olympic gear, which I wore around the University of Utah, bright yellow and bright green and gold, different shirts and shorts, looking like an idiot. The school colors were red, mind you, but I was who I was, right? But fly back to Utah, 3 bags, and then get ready to commence my sophomore year. So this was just a quick, episode to discuss the Athens Olympics and the trials and tribulations of my first Olympic Games. And I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, there's some good behind the scenes stories there. One other thing, I'd like to thank everyone for supporting this My Journey series through Bogues podcast. The numbers are bigger than I thought they would. I thought this would be a really specific kind of crowd that would listen to these, but it's seeming to hit a lot of different demographics, a lot of cool stories in there outside of basketball. So I appreciate everyone sharing it, appreciate everyone tuning in. Remember Rogue Bogues, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all that fun stuff. Give us a subscribe, a like, get engaged with us. We do a lot of different Q&As for different portions of the podcast. So continue to tell everyone about it, and hopefully we'll keep pumping these out. Thank you.